this, and we're greeting you from the Frigate Bay Marriott Hotel Resort, and we're very honored and privileged to have the Minister, the Honorable Louis Farrakhan from the Nation of Islam as a very special guest here on issues on Freedom FM in St. Kitts and Nevis. We greet all our listeners who are across the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, across the Caribbean and worldwide, following on freedomskn.com. We are also trying to resolve the video issues we're having, and so that we can make this presentation also available on the World Wide Web via Facebook, and we have that up and running as well. I want to say a very special good afternoon to a dear friend whom I had the opportunity to meet right here in St. Kitts, his ancestral home, many years ago when he visited the island and was staying at Timothy Beach. Most of you should know by now that Minister Louis Farrakhan's mother is a Kittitian by birth, and so this is his ancestral home. And he's here, he has come back time and time again to enlighten us, to give us food for thought on the best solutions to what we're going through in our lives, no matter what it may be it social, economic, be it political. And so this afternoon, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a great man of history of all times, the living legend, Minister Louis Farrakhan. Good afternoon, Minister Farrakhan.
Good afternoon, my dear brother. Peace to you and peace to all of your listeners in St. Kitts and Nevis and throughout the world. It's an honor to be here with you.
Minister Farrakhan, before we get into the context of what we would like to speak about today, I just want to inquire about your family, your health. How are things going with you? The last time we saw you, I think it was, I can't even remember the year, but I know you were here and you spoke to young people. There was a special gathering for young people. I think there was a different government in place at the time under the Prime Ministership of the Honorable Dr. Denzel Llewellyn Douglas and the St. Kitts and Nevis Labour Party. Now we have a triad of political parties which comprise the government, which is the Team Unity government. And I understand you met the Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Mark Brantley, recently.
Yes, sir.
So how are things with you, Minister?
Well, health-wise, I'm grateful to God. All that we have been through fighting cancer, but God is great, and if He didn't have something more for me to do,
Right.
I wouldn't be here. I thank God for my health and my strength. Next month, God willing, I will be 85 years of age.
85.
Yes.
Fantastic.
And God has been so good.
Yes.
And I have my family here with me, my wife and several of my children, and of course friends and some of the brothers from different parts of the country. When they heard that I was going to be here, and of course before I came here, I was in Cuba with a delegation of 23 persons. And we have been trying to get to Cuba to pay our respect to Comandante Fidel Castro. And so we were not able to do it when he passed a year or so ago. So this was our opportunity. So we came, and we were blessed to be able to go to Santiago de Cuba and see where he is laid to rest, and we paid our respect to our brother. And I couldn't be in the Caribbean and not come to St. Kitts and to see my ancestral home and and just to be quiet. But when I got the call that Judy Libert was on the phone, you know I can't ever deny you anything, so here we are.
Thank you. Interesting that you mentioned Cuba, because they have provided tremendous assistance to the Federation of Syndicate in health, particularly, in sports, in economic upliftment of the country, so to speak. They have done that. They have been here for us. And they have, to a very large extent, revolutionized medicine in Cuba, especially we know hearing that they have discovered a cure for certain forms of cancer. Have you found out anything about this during your visit?
Yes.
Yes.
Years ago, when cancer had taken a grip on me, I came to Cuba.
Right.
And Fidel Castro introduced me to his doctors. And they told me of an operation that I would ultimately have to have. I didn't like that because I had already been cut on, and I didn't want to be cut on anymore.
Right.
But they were right. And so in 2007, I went in the hospital and was on the operating table for 14 hours. And at that time, they removed a lot of my organs that had been destroyed by radiation therapy that was not necessarily designed to cure me, but designed to kill me. And so that they could say that Farrakhan died of natural causes. When I met with Winnie Mandela during that time, she said, you know, Farrakhan, when you were in the hospital, they announced in South Africa that you had died.
Wow.
And in America, CNN and the New York Times had an obituary already written for me because they did not expect that I would live. But by the grace of God, I'm here, and even though I'm not 100%, I'm still able to function.
You're looking well for 85. You're looking exceptionally well, and hope God will give you strength and longevity, which I'm sure is part of your DNA.
While I was in Cuba, Comandante Fidel offered the Nation of Islam 1,000 medical scholarships.
Okay.
And when I went back to the United States, I met with a brother who was over all of the community colleges in Chicago, that we could work together to fulfill what Comandante had given to us. But the fear of communism, the fear of the propaganda of the media against Castro, against Cuba, many did not wish to take advantage of that offer. So we in the Nation of Islam tried our best, and we have now several students that have graduated from that institution, and I have 2 grandchildren that are 5 years there, and in 2 years, God willing, they will graduate as doctors. And the only thing that Fidel required was that you take the knowledge of medicine back to the community out of which you came. And that we are bound to do.
Exceptional. That is just great news. Do you see a lessening of the embargo and the restrictions that were previously imposed on Cuba happening in our time, to the extent we now know that flights are going to Havana from the U.S. and under Obama, the previous president, there was a relaxation, if you will, on the strict rules and regulations governing U.S. and Cuba relations.
Well, thanks to President Obama, the door opened, not fully, but it opened. And unfortunately, our present president seems to have a hatred for the things that President Obama did, so he tried to close the door, but it did not close completely. And now that Americans have been free to travel here, and family members have come back to meet members of their family, the embargo still is in place, but there is a weakening politically of the will to continue that embargo. And I believe before not too long, Cuba will be free of that. In fact, what is happening now in America is signaling the clouds of war to gather. And while I'm on this broadcast, I would like to send a message to our president, because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that we're in a period called the lull before the storm. The storm is World War III, or what is called in the Bible the War of Armageddon. In that war, which is prophesied, and we can't make the prophets liars. Everything that they prophesied in both the Bible and Quran are going to come to pass. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, knowing that there was a political dynamic at the time that he wrote this article, The Lull Before the Storm, he said, whoever should be president, it would be to his advantage to delay the war as long as he could, because it could be a great benefit to whoever would be in power. Unfortunately, President Trump has gathered around him some of the neoconservatives who are considered warmongers. And if President Trump attacks Syria under a false flag operation that President Assad killed his own people through the use of chemical warfare, if Mr. Trump goes the way he is presently going, it would be like taking a gun and putting it to his head and to the head of America and to the head of the Western world. The Western world will not survive this war. So once the war is started, the end of this present world has arrived. That is my warning to Mr. Trump. Delay it as long as you can, for as long as you can is to your benefit and to the benefit of America and all your so-called allies.
All right. I want to move from the international scene that you've just so very vividly described in terms of the U.S. and its relationship with the world, to look now specifically, if you will, at the black struggle in the U.S., the Caribbean, in the UK, wherever black people are in the diaspora. In your opinion, Minister Farrakhan, are things getting better or worse for the black man today? I mean, we've seen all that President Trump is doing. We've seen the rise in the shooting of black youth in the United States at a rate that is unprecedented. And so we're seeing all the crime in the ghettos of America, where violence and crime highlighting the failure to provide adequate jobs, housing, social programs for our youth. What is your comment on the state of black America?
We are victims of social engineering, taking factories out of the inner cities 40 years ago and not replacing them with anything that would give job opportunities to black people to feed their families. Yes. Then drugs were brought in, guns were brought in to create the havoc that we now see. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was a national security advisor, I think under Jimmy Carter, he said it's easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. With the technology that's now available, you and I are talking, and the words that we just spoke are on social media. If it's on Facebook, if it's on Instagram, if it's on Twitter, if it's on any of the media outlets that this iPhone and smartphone and the work of Steve Jobs and others has done, the whole world is at our fingertips in an instant, which means that the control of the masses that has always been the purview of elites who control media and information that goes to the public. That's over now. So what you have in Black America, in the Caribbean, in the UK, in Africa, all over the world, is an instant communication that's causing the awakening of the masses. This is both good and bad. It's good that we are awakening, which means we are demanding more. We are trying to correct the mistakes that we make, but we're also forcing government to do what government does not want to do for the masses of black and brown people. So things are better in one way and worse in another. What is worse? The fact that the enemy, and we do have a vicious enemy, an enemy that wants to see us slaughter each other. So guns that young people don't have the money to buy, nor do they have the skill in use. Sometimes some of the gang leaders have said that they come into the community with crates full of the most deadly kind of weapons, the Uzi, the AK-47, the MAC-10, all of these automatic weapons, bullets are brought in. Then they're distributed among the gangs. So the gang mentality is we kill each other. So right now, the youth of America, black and brown, are under assault by the government and the use of police force against young people. They stop us, they frisk us. If we have marijuana on our person, or we're found with a gun. We usually don't live if we're found with a gun, but with marijuana, the prison industrial complex gets our bodies, and the 13th Amendment will be in full force, that you only are a citizen as long as you're not a felon. So as many felons as there are in the prison system of America, they are working for the multinational corporations for no jobs. But when they get out of prison, there's no job for them at all. So crime is offered to them. So that's the bad thing. But war that is coming up is going to break the power of those that have subjected both the black and the brown, and those who are struggling in the Caribbean. This is another place where you see things happening, you're not so sure of what you're looking at. But I remember when I was a young Calypsonian, there was a song that a Calypsonian sang. It goes, small island, go back where you come from. They come by the 1 and the 2 and the 3. Now I find them up inside me breadfruit tree. So Trinidad are 2 small islands. Go back where you really come from. Well, now you see people coming. They're buying citizenship. They bring money. But that's how they came to Texas. When Texas was under the control of Mexico, they came by the 1, the 2, and the 3. Then pretty soon, a war started, and that caused America to go to war with Mexico, and Mexico lost Texas, Mexico lost Arizona, California, because of a few that came that opened the door for the many whose desire it was to come. So we're going to change that lyric. They come by the 1 and the 2 and the 3. Soon they're going to tell you, we own your country. So if we are not wise, knowledgeable as to how this is going, we are opening the door to the Trojan horse that has in their mind to take the resources of the Caribbean, to take the islands of the Caribbean, because Europe is going up in flames in the Third World War, so they're looking for a place to hide, a place to live, and a place to continue to keep us in servitude. So now we are servants in the tourist industry, not producing industry. And that's why the unity of the Caribbean is a must.
I want to touch on something that you said concerning the unity in the Caribbean. Because we've had CARICOM, which is a failure by my reckoning, and we've had some other regional attempts at coming together, not politically but economically, and these have failed. One of the things that has struck me is the fact that our young people are coming back to serve the tourist industry, where they're just making the beds and doing the usual thing. That is something that happened under slavery as well. And so tourism is seen as almost a new kind of slavery, if you will. How do you think that young people in particular, because everywhere you go in the Caribbean, you have this range of young people in the droves, in the hundreds, in the thousands, without jobs, not knowing where they're going. It seems they're just drifting with the tide. And so my question to you is, how can we arrest the downward slide, if you will, of the young people in the Caribbean? What can they do? Why aren't governments focusing on giving young people adequate jobs, reinforcing those who want to go into entrepreneurship and so on. Why is there this outbreak of crime in Trinidad, in Jamaica, even here in St. Kitts and Nevis? We've had 10 people who have been murdered for the year. This is a small country. Last year, I think we had almost 30 people who were murdered in St. Kitts. And this was unheard of when I was growing up. And I'm not that old, but I'm saying, I mean, if you had one person who was murdered for a year, that was a lot. But now it seems to have become the norm throughout the Caribbean, where young people are just roaming and so materialistic and so on. What is the vision of our leaders in terms of righting this wrong?
When I was a young boy growing up in America, West Indian people loved their islands, but we were always clashing with each other.
Right.
The Bajan this, the Trinidadian that, the Jamaican this. That was fostered by the enemy. So you have the British West Indies, you have the Spanish Caribbean, you have the Dutch Caribbean, the French Caribbean, and each of these Europeans have all fought each other over the spoils of the Caribbean. So the hatred that they have for one another, they bred it into us. So the British hatred for the Spanish, that's all in the history of the educational system. So we grow up not only disliking fellow members of the British West Indies, we grow up hating the Spanish members of the Caribbean, the Dutch members of the Caribbean, and the French members of the Caribbean. And unfortunately, that residue of that self-hate is still here. It takes political will. The economists have in CARICOM, they mean good. But the enemy also is working against the good thinking of the leaders of CARICOM. Look at how many of our nations in the Caribbean are subjected to the IMF and the World Bank. What is happening to the natural resources that were present when we were slaves? That in the British West Indies, according to our studies, the British West Indies brought more revenue to England than all her other territories. Why? Because sugar was here, tobacco was here, bananas, fruits were here. But now, all of a sudden, all the industries that made money for the colonial masters, where are they now? The sugar industry is gone. The banana industry, gone. The bauxite that we had in Jamaica and in Guyana, we send it off to Europe. Europe makes aluminum, sells it back to us at high prices. So we are subjected to forces that we have not quite learned how to deal with effectively. So in the Caribbean now, in Barbados, our great brothers there fostering reparations. And we are all together to say to England, to say to France, to say to Europe, you owe us for slave labor. That's nice. We can say it. We have all the legal documents to show that what they owe us. But the reality is you can make the demand, but you don't have the power to enforce the demand. So when the IMF loans you money to bring a bigger port here in St. Kitts so that bigger ships could come in, but at the same time the ships coming in, but the industry is going down, so you're still serving in tourism.
Yes.
What does that mean? There's a rise in prostitution. Look at the food. We used to grow food, but now our food is coming from North America, from Europe, from Australia. It looks good, but when you eat it, why do we have so much high blood pressure, obesity, and Barbados is the amputee capital of the Caribbean? Why? Because we're not growing the food that we consume, and we're trusting the enemy. So they vaccinate us, they give us drugs, but the things that they're giving us in the water, in the food, is killing us slowly. So until and unless we awaken sufficiently, it's not enough for CARICOM. There has to be a spiritual awakening. But as long as we are tied to the religious system of our former colonial and slave masters, where we see Jesus as a white man, as we see the angels as white, as we see heaven somewhere in the sky, then we give control of the earth to those who have been our enemies. We need a spiritual awakening. So the preachers have to come in line. The teachers have to come in line. Then the politicians will be much more backed. And then we can do something about the conditions under which we live. The youth are separated from the elders. The youth don't want what the elders are satisfied with. You don't find the youth going to church. Why? Because they see us as preachers, as pimps, as their grandmothers over their grandmothers and mothers. The youth are hurting because we, the elders, have not provided for them a future. So there's anger in the youth. And all you have to do when you have an angry young black man or woman, then bring the drugs, bring the guns. They're sending back to St. Kitts people that never knew anything about St. Kitts, that did something in America, some little misdemeanor, they deport them. St. Kitts may not have a job for them. Then what are they going to do in St. Kitts? The same thing that they do in America, form gangs, get into criminal pursuit. It's a plan. And the only way to get out from the plan is to know that the enemy is working and thriving on the ignorance of us. And ignorance is our worst enemy, the lack of knowledge. So the Bible says, my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. You don't know yourself and you don't know the enemy. He come with a smile and a pat on the back and a few American dollars or euros, and he's buying his way. And soon they'll be in the parliament. Soon they'll be running for president. And their money will cause them to win favor from the ignorant masses, because we are not educating them. That's why your program, that's why this radio station is so valuable, because you're imparting knowledge to the masses of the people. Junie, we have a lot of work to do, and it's hard work, but I know that if Trump keeps going and the war starts, remember how England used to say that the sun never sets on the British Empire? Well, the sun can hardly find it today. And when war breaks, the power of Great Britain will be broken. And you will be saying, not God save the Queen, God save us from the Queen. We need to be free to think beyond white people's education, politics, and jurisprudence. That's going to take some doing. But if we continue the way we're going, our people will be free. I see it from the top down, and I hear it from the bottom up. The top is wrestling with how do we get out from under this? Because mentally, we are enslaved to the education, religion, politics, jurisprudence of our former slave masters.
All right. It's now just about 15 minutes after the hour of 2 o'clock. You're live and direct on Freedom FM 106.5 and also on our Facebook page. We're doing the video stream there. My guest this afternoon is the Honorable Louis Farrakhan from the Nation of Islam. Minister Farrakhan, the Chinese are making significant inroads in the Caribbean as we speak. They're here in St. and Nevis, and you can see step by step they're taking control of the commanding heights of the economy. There's a Chinatown, I'm sure, in every Caribbean island. When I lived in the United States in Brooklyn, the Chinese were everywhere, especially with the food, the vegetables, the fruits, with the restaurants and so on. How does this bode for the development of the Caribbean with the influx of the Chinese?
Everywhere you see the Chinese, you see the Indians, you see the Arabs, they're here. And everywhere you see them, they do business. The black man may be the majority population, but the power, the economic thrust and force is with those who are economically wise and skilled. The Chinese see an opportunity, not only in the Caribbean, but in Africa, wherever we are. But what they call Chinese communists, the capital of Beijing. The Chinese go into Africa and they offer you what you are not doing for yourself. You're not feeding yourself. So they come, they take a plot of land and they begin farming, giving you vegetables. They know how to farm. They have to feed 1,200,000,000 or 300 million Chinese, so they're looking for every bit of land they could get to produce food. They produce food for us, they produce food for themselves. What we need to do is learn. They will help us, but if we want to help ourselves, we learn from those who come in, but then we have to take this to ourselves. Yeah. We have to do these things. So in Trinidad, the Indians came as indentured servants or whatever. But look at them now. The wealth of Guyana, the wealth of Trinidad is in the hands of the Indians, the Arabs, the Chinese. We have to learn. It's not that we are inferior, but the state of mind that the slave masters put us in, we have to break the chains off of our minds so that we can do business, because that's the essence of life itself is business. And so if others are going to do business, then we'll always be servants of those who are doing it. We must get up and do something for ourselves.
Okay, now there's another aspect of this that I want to touch on before we wrap up. The question of the future of marijuana, which is used by our young people, which is grown by farmers in the Caribbean, in the Windward Islands, specifically Jamaica is known for the ganja, St. Vincent. But what we have seen recently in Jamaica, St. Vincent, Antigua, is to take away the stigma that has been attached to people who have been arrested for a spliff, a joint, to remove their record so that they can have access to jobs and that kind of thing. We've now heard that there's a lot of money in medical marijuana, if you will. And so this is being looked at by our people, some of our people here, our farmers in particular, as something that they could get into to bring them some kind of revenue to deal with the balance of payment for the country and so on. How do you look at marijuana, medical marijuana? We've seen documentaries on CNN about its use, its value to people suffering from cancer, epilepsy, and all kinds, asthma and all kinds of things. Should the Caribbean, where we have all these lands now which were previously allocated to sugar and banana and tobacco and so on, do we cultivate these lands now and grow marijuana for medical use?
Every nation is looking for a cash crop.
Yes.
So then in America, it's soybeans, it's corn that the world needs. So many farmers are growing soybeans and corn, putting it on the international market to bring currency back into the country. Marijuana, I'll put it like this, I'll start from God. God has created nothing without a purpose. And since God is ultimately good and the author of good, in everything that he created, the wisdom of a righteous person is to find the good in it and exploit the good. But anything that will give you good, improperly used, will become evil. So in the Quran, there's a scripture that says that God, we seek refuge in him from the mischief of created things. Sex has been in existence since God made man. And it didn't start with the white man. It started from the black man millions and millions and billions of years ago. And the only reason man is here today is because sex was created by God. And the male-female dynamic has always been our natural attraction to create life for the procreation of our species. So everything in nature involves itself in sex. But the same thing that we do to procreate life is now being used to destroy life. So who is behind that? So now I'm a man, I'm in love with another man? Oh God, what happened there? Listen, God never made man to lay with man or woman to lay with woman. This is something that has come in the last 6,000 years, and the root of it was seen in Sodom and Gomorrah. And God destroyed Sodom, but he said, as it was in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. So now look at the coca leaf. That's not a bad thing. Mother Tainetta, one of the wives of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, was down in South America, and she was, I think it was in Peru, and she was going up, traveling up the mountain. As you get high up in the mountain, you lose oxygen, so they took the coca leaf and they made a tea. And everyone going up that mountain had to drink the tea so that they could survive the pressure of the heights. That's the good of coca leaf. Somebody else see it. Now the boy high from cocaine, and the enemy found a way to weaponize cocaine and made it into crack, and so you have this epidemic of crack cocaine. I'm saying marijuana has a good thing in it. Grapes has energy in it, but you can ferment it. Next thing you know, you're drunk. So Jesus turned water into wine. So shall we gather at the river? Jesus was not a drunkard. Right. He wasn't trying to make us drunkards. But wine, the wine here is turning something that has a positive thing, and then overdoing it, it becomes evil. So marijuana has good in it. Medical marijuana has been proved to be a very good help in natural use of that to heal many, many things. But the CIA has weaponized marijuana. So now you have scientists dealing with the marijuana and then flooding our community with marijuana. Then we are smoking and using it in a way that makes us very, very ill and prone to abnormal behavior. So we have to get control of it. I wouldn't say it's wrong in St. Kitts to plant some marijuana for medical purposes. That's fine. But don't, because it's a cash crop, take all the sugarcane land and make it marijuana land, because you can't eat marijuana. You got to have food. And what's wrong in the Caribbean, Barbados used to feed itself. Barbados can't do it now because they have turned the arable land into golf course and all these kind of things. And we don't play golf, we play cricket. But white folk come down and play golf, and others play golf. But where's the food? Oh, I see. The food is not coming from the earth that's under our foot. We're buying it from America. We're buying it from Australia. God help us if we don't help ourselves. So there's nothing wrong with medical marijuana. It just has to be used for medical purposes.
Right, and a couple of Caribbean countries are decriminalizing marijuana as we speak, putting the necessary legislation in place to deal with that, so that, as I said, persons who have records would be expunged and people be able to go on and live productive lives instead of having a past filled with marijuana arrests for a spliff and a joint and so on. In some islands, they're even allowing them to have a certain amount legally to have that. Beyond that, you could get arrested. I don't know how much grams they're allowing, but that's the law now that I understand is in Antigua, and I think St. Vincent, Ralph Gonzalez is doing something down there. Jamaica is growing medical marijuana. The University of the West Indies is also doing that, and they're looking at ways and means to get resources for Jamaicans from medical marijuana. I want to move on because we're being pressed for time and ask you about your reflections of your tenure as the Nation of Islam leader. You've been there for how long now? As the leader?
About 40 years.
40 years?
Yes.
Right. I don't know if I can ask you this,
Sure.
but I will ask you if there is some kind of succession plan for.
Well, I have to be very, very honest.
Mm-hmm.
They used to ask Elijah Muhammad that question.
Okay.
And he said he would not have a successor, but after him would be helpers who believed in what he taught and would carry that teaching into practice. There's only one Elijah Muhammad, but when I saw the nation going in a different direction from his teaching, I decided to rebuild his work. And I could not rebuild his work unless I brought back the majesty of his teaching and tried to follow it as closely as I could. I have now scores of young people who are doing the same because life ain't promised. No. And the nation should never die because I die. So reproducing people, men and women, that have that mind and that spirit to keep the work of Elijah Muhammad going on. That is how he continues. He was the leader. I have not had an independent thought in 40 years. That man has seeded my mind with so much wisdom, so help me God, Junie, that circumstances come up and something comes up that he already taught me. He prepared me to run this race for 40 years. I have done what I was supposed to do up to this point, and now there is a cadre of young men and women. If they follow my example, the nation will never fall. But to say that I'm as wise as my teacher, I don't think so. That man has given us a foundation that those of us who study him will take this nation from the level that I brought it back to by God's grace to a higher level, and that's the economic, industry, all of that goes for a nation. We have to get involved.
Minister, before we wrap up, I would like to ask you about this revolution in this package here called Let's Change the World, which is a tribute to your musical skills and prowess. Tell us a little bit about this before we wrap up this afternoon. Just get a shot of it on the camera.
Oh, Ron, we're on camera now.
Yes, we're on camera from the beginning.
Oh, God. Thank the engineers, man. Thank you. But listen, Junie, this is a big story. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I was in show business.
Yes.
And when I met Elijah Muhammad and became a Muslim, I took the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and I produced a play that played in Carnegie Hall, Town Hall, Symphony Hall in Boston. Mm-hmm. And I wrote music with lyrics that raised the consciousness of the people. At a certain point, Honorable Elijah Muhammad saw me perform, and he invited me to his home the next day, and he asked me if I would give it up totally and concentrate on the word. He said, your music is great, but the spiritual aspect of your life is greater than your music. And Junior, just say it like this. When a man sings a song as I sung, and my singing voice is on this, my calypso is on this, my jazz and classical violin is on this. But when you finish singing, and you finish playing, this is what you get. People go out, the song is ended, and even the melody don't linger on. But when you can teach a people and bring them from one level to another, that is not applause that you see the awakening of your people. Right. So I gave it all up to awaken our people, and I'm known all over the world for the awakening message of Elijah Muhammad. But one day, I brought my violin to Chicago, and after dinner, he asked me, play something for me. Mm-hmm. And I played the violin, and after I finished, he looked at me and said, boy, you really can play that thing. A few weeks later, he sent for me to bring my violin again. And after dinner, his wife played the piano, his children did a little music, and then he asked me to play. But after I finished, I saw a frown on his face. Mm-hmm. And when I finished, he said, isn't that the same song you played for me the last time you were here? Mm-hmm. I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, don't you know anything new? In a subtle way, he was putting me back on my music. And I have to say, this is a work of 14 years. You have never heard Louis Farrakhan playing with the symphony orchestra.
No, I haven't.
I have performed with the Chicago Symphony. I've performed with the Los Angeles Symphony. 2 great concertos. They're not in here, but I will send that to you. The minister playing classical music has expanded me and helped me to see the universality in the word that he gave me. When you met me first, you could say Farrakhan is a black nationalist, because all my talk is the black man, because I love my people. But one day I was with my teacher. He said, they call me a black nationalist. He said, but black is not national, brother. Black is universal, because everything started in darkness, then comes out into the light. So like Jesus, he started very nationalistically, only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But after that, he said, go ye into all the world and bring this gospel. Well, there's a universal message in the message to the black man, because he's the father and the mother of every race that's on this earth. And the reason the races are in the condition that they're in is because the father of the races has been asleep. It's our wake-up time now. And when we wake up, our job is to pull the whole house back in order. Black, brown, red, yellow. And if there's any white people who can live under black rule, you're going to soon see it. So in this, you have Farrakhan with Stevie Wonder, Farrakhan with Shaka Khan, Farrakhan with Rick Ross, Snoop Dogg.
Wow.
All I've got, by the grace of God, 5 Grammy-winning artists playing with me, plus musicians that are some of the finest in the world, composers. This is such an unusual album. It has classical, it has gospel, it has jazz, it has folk, it has light opera, it has calypso, reggae, hip-hop, bebop.
Complete works.
It's Farrakhan
Yes.
in all the genres of music, pulling it all together in this beautiful box set. And Snoop Dogg May God bless that brother. I sent for him one day in California, and I said, Snoop, would you help me? I said, the youth are being misused. I would like to wake the youth up, and instead of having them being used by crooked elites for the robbery of the natural resources of other nations, let's make the youth of the world agents of change. He went away and came back with a song, Let's Change the World.
Fantastic.
And so that's the theme of this album. And Junie, I guess what I have to do, I love you so much, and your blessed mother. I cannot even explain in words what your mother means to me. I don't say meant, because I came by the house and she was sitting on the porch. And your mother is a truth teller, a bold black woman, she calls it, just like she saw it. And she is your foundation, and she's encouragement of me in my foundation. So in honor of your blessed mother, and in honor of you and freedom, your radio station, may I offer this token of my love for you. And I want you to just take your time. May I open it a minute?
Sure.
To all the audience, this is a book of 100 pages. You see the picture of the two men that are the inspiration behind me. And, of course, this is the minister when I was 60 years old, 60. After I performed with the Chicago Symphony, the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. I'm going to send it, both of these concertos, down to you. But I would love for you to read the comments and then take your time and listen.
Yes.
And Junie, I'm going to call you back
And ask me
and
what I
you
think.
tell me what you think.
Definitely.
Now, I know you have a wonderful radio station. I don't want it yet out.
Yes.
Where people can take it down, and I want them to have it, but I want to try to get back the money that we put out to produce it.
Makes sense.
Okay? So.
And for more info on the minister's music, you can go to LCTW Music. That's LCTWmusic.com. Also visit NOI.org. That's NOI.org for more on this fantastic work of art here. Let's change the world. And Minister, I give you the assurance that I'm going to read, and I thank you so much for this. On behalf of my mom and Freedom FM, I thank you so much, and I will treasure it always. Thank you again.
May God continue to bless you, my dear brother,
Yes.
and all those who you inspire all over the Caribbean and other parts of the world.
Thank you.
Thank you, Junie.
All right. And on that note, I would like to end this edition of Issues St. Kitts and Nevis, where we had as our guest the esteemed Minister Louis Farrakhan from the Nation of Islam. Minister, may you continue to thrive. May your health continue to be improved, and the next time will be better and greater. God bless you. I love you.
I love you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, that's it from us here at the Marriott Hotel with Minister Louis Farrakhan and his family who are around him at this time. You can't see them, but they're here. And we thank God that we're able to see his beloved wife and his sons. They're all here in the room today. And it's a pleasure to see Brother Josh, whom I have fond memories with, because he visits time and time again, and Minister Farrakhan's esteemed wife and his other son over here, and the other children, the daughter, they're all here. And maybe you should come and say hello.
Well, if they could come and say hello, I just want to say that Damian Marley
is also in the world.
The Marley family.
They're also here.
Stephen Marley.
Stephen Marley. All right, so on behalf of all of us here at the Marriott Hotel, I want to thank Kareem, who has been doing the audio portion of the transmission this afternoon. Thank you, Kareem. I want to thank my son, El Jamadi Kembe, for the video work, and Ike in the studio, and all who've helped to make this special broadcast available this afternoon to not only St. Kitts and Nevis, but the entire world. Thank you again, and God bless you. From Freedom FM 106.5 here at the Marriott, we're now sending you back to Master Control and Mr. Maurice Ike Flanders. Good afternoon. Word!
Who's here?